Thank you everyone for joining us for our second ever live panel. Actually, we ran one, when was that, in March or so, on competitive pricing, and it had really good feedback. So we wanted to do another kind of open forum Q&A session. And today's one is about shifting your competitive program from reactive to proactive. And we have two great guests join with me today, Chris Janiszewski and Lisa Kalner Williams. Oh, hi, Suman. You might have to pop off on your screen there. So before we begin, I'm just going to get all of the housekeeping stuff out the way before I forget. Yes, the recording will be sent to everyone after the session. Mac on our marketing team will be sending that out by the end of day. And also the recording is going to be up on our podcast feed, which is the Competitive Enablement Show on Apple, Spotify, all of that good stuff. So if you haven't checked that out yet, please do, because we've got some really good guests coming up on there, and this recording will be on there. And then secondly, as we mentioned, and the reason you've joined, this is an interactive session. We're really, the floor is yours really to ask any and all of the questions you have for Lisa and Chris in the world of building a competitive program, any of your burning questions. I've got a couple of topics that we want to get to, but I'm more than happy to field any questions, or if something really kind of sparks some interest, we can kind of go down that path. So we've got two great guests. They're going to have some good answers, no pressure on either of you here. And I'm excited to kind of kick things off. But before I get to formally introducing you to Lisa and Chris, I just wanted to quickly share something that we've been working on at Clue. We recently launched the competitive enablement maturity model, which in human terms means we've essentially built a roadmap that can help guide how you get from point A, which might be, we're completely starting off here in the world of competitive. We don't know where to begin, or we know that it's something we care about, but where to start, and kind of building a roadmap that leads you all the way to that ideal point where your competitive program is kicking butt, it's increasing revenue, it's helping improve win rates, and you're putting teams in the position to succeed and beat the competition. And some of the results from our research kind of built out these 5 stages of maturity you can see here. I'm not going to get into all of the details because that's not what we came for, but you can check all of that out on our website. There's a link in the slides that will be sent out to everyone after. It's clue.com/maturity-model. And I'll get Mac, if you could throw that link in the chat as well, would be great. And then one last thing on this kind of model, just to give a little bit of idea to it, is if you're wondering, no, we didn't just pull a roadmap out of thin air. We spent a lot of time actually going through some of the report from the data from our report in the 2021 competitive enablement report from earlier in the year. And something that was really cool is actually we consulted and collaborated with over 20 competitive experts to kind of build out these real stages of maturity based on their own firsthand experience. And actually, I believe a couple of our collaborators are joining us today. So if I can't see who's here yet, but if you're there in the chat, thank you for your time and expertise. But the reason I wanted to lead with this maturity model is because both of our guests today have had very different starting points with a competitive program, but they've each done a really good job of moving it along this maturity model. So with that said, I'm excited to introduce our guests. We have Lisa Kalner Williams, the product marketing manager at Agorapulse, and Chris Janiszewski, the director of marketing intelligence at UiPath. Lisa and Chris, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Before I get into any of my hard-hitting questions here, would you like to just share a little bit about your companies, the space they operated in, and your own personal experience with competitive intelligence?
Sure. I'm Lisa. I too am based in Boston. I see a few people in the chat. I work for a company based in Paris, France, and I also saw someone in the chat from France. Well represented. Agorapulse is a social media management tool. So if you're a business who manages, or an agency who manages a lot of busy social media profiles, whether it's posting or responding or reporting on what kind of action you've had, Agorapulse might be a solution for you. and I have been working with the competitive intelligence program for the company for the past 3 years.
Nice. My name's Chris Janiszewski in the Americanized way. Adam,
Oh, I'm sorry.
you're saying it the Polish way, so completely fine. Don't worry about it. So I work for a company called UiPath. UiPath is an automation platform vendor focused on mainly RPA. That's where we got our start. So what that means for those of you that are unfamiliar is UiPath has software robots that are able to emulate human interactions with computers to automate menial repetitive tasks to free people up to do more human work that requires minds, requires thinking, requires not just boring repetitive things. I've been on the competitive intelligence team. I was one of the first couple members here at UiPath, joining in 2018. Before that, I worked at Oracle, also doing competitive intelligence. So I've been in the CI space for about 7 years now.
Awesome. So let's get into this thing. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and kick this thing off. So let's start with you, Lisa. I think let's kind of get to the starting point of where did your competitive program look like to begin with, and what were the major pains that you were facing?
I would be overly boastful if I even said it was a competitive intelligence program. It was pretty much a spreadsheet. So our competitive intelligence spreadsheet was populated by me and a virtual assistant, and we knew that we were facing 2 big competitors in our space. So we found everything available on them and just put it in one column and described what it is in a second column. And the pain point was no one was using it. And so we needed to figure out why that was. And we knew we needed to scale up. We were eventually going to add more competitors. So we needed to figure out how to make this usable for our sales reps as we began to grow and expand.
And then, Chris, in your case at UiPath, you weren't starting from ground zero, right? Where was your program at? And I guess what were the main obstacles you had to progressing or improving the program itself?
Yeah, so as I said, I was one of the first members on the competitive team here. We built out a pretty good sized team, really got built out a ton of different collateral for our top competitors. And then due to some organizational reprioritization, the team decreased in size. And at the same time that was happening, UiPath expanded our platform to include new emerging products. And with all of those new emerging products came a ton of new competitors that weren't core to what we had been covering beforehand. So the main obstacle, and one of the reasons that we got Clue, was to really help keeping track of all of these new competitors with the decreased size of the team that we were going to be facing. So that's kind of the core thing that we were facing, in addition to maintaining the key collateral that we were trying to keep up to date with our core competitors.
I think that's a good starting point as well, Chris, to kind of get into this, because like you mentioned there, now you've got new products across new lines, ultimately creating new competitors. And this might be common for a lot of people, is when you just have so many competitors or so many new ones, how do you, first of all, map that out? And what did you actually do to kind of prioritize which ones to focus on and which one to keep tabs on? Like what was the process like from your end?
Yeah, in terms of identification, as I said, I think in the core product area that we had of RPA, we were pretty familiar with the competitors. But when we expanded the platform, when we made some acquisitions to new product areas, it was net new for us. We weren't really familiar. So one of the first things we did was look at analyst reports, see, who the top competitors that are mentioned there are. For some of these things, it's a brand new technology that doesn't have any analyst coverage. So at that point, it's really about ad hoc requests, seeing who the field is running into, keeping track of who we're getting questions about, tracking those types of things, in Salesforce and other areas. So that's laying out the landscape. In terms of prioritizing, mainly looking at a couple of things. Which competitors are having the most impact on revenue? Again, looking at our CRM, looking at the number of deals they're part of, and the number of deals of a certain size of revenue. Those are the ones that we prioritize. Those are the ones that we kept the most focus on. But we also looked at who our field was running into the most in terms of who they're asking us about directly, keeping track of that as an additional metric to make sure we're serving, our internal customers the best we can. And then last, again, kind of circling back to how we created the matrix of competitors, looking at analyst ratings, seeing who analysts are saying are well regarded, because in all likelihood, we will run into them more and more. So those are kind of the three key things we use to prioritize.
And so when you're mapping that out as well, is there almost like, do you tier the competitors? I know you had a good idea of like your main ones.
Yep.
As you're tiering them out, how do you kind of allocate your time and resources on how deep you should go on each one? How much is like, okay, they're coming up, we really need to like get on top of this, and how many are like, we're going to keep tabs on this for later? Like, how does that allocation kind of go?
Yeah, so basically the way that we had thought about it and tiered our competitors was there's tier one, which is, these guys are a threat to our revenue. They're a major threat overall. We need to keep as up to date on them, make sure the field is as well enabled as possible. Then there are the tier two competitors, which are, all right, we should probably put something together to really help out the field in case they run into them, but it doesn't need to be updated as often. It doesn't need to be as deep technically or as deep in terms of messaging. Really, our overall product story should help get us over the hump when competing with them. We don't need as many specifics. And then we have a huge long list of emerging competitors. This is really either someone that has a new round of funding that has a fundamentally different way of approaching the market, or an adjacency that's very interesting to us that we want to just keep tabs on, whether competitive or not. Any smaller competitors that we get questions about now and again, just add them to the list to make sure that there's nothing new or crazy that they're coming out with, and just again maintain our level of intelligence and information on them. So those are kind of the three tiers that were established for us.
And that's kind of ties into that, like you mentioned as the name of this presentation, sort of going from being proactive, just like having those little, like at least having some sort of monitoring so that you can see the warning bells if something does arise. Lisa, in your case, you're competing against different competitors in different geographic markets as well, and as this very small team. Give me an insight. What did the landscape look like? And as someone that was starting off at a way earlier starting point, how do you prioritize? How do you get a grip of what this landscape looked like?
Sure. Yep, sure. And I was about to answer the question that Tracy just asked by saying I am a team of one. So I really place a lot of emphasis on prioritization. And it does come down to similar what Chris says, revenue. I do look at the MRR from both the sales and the customer success team. So if we're losing competitive deals on the sales side, I'll keep track of the revenue. And if we're losing customers to a competitor for the customer success side, look at that as well. Sometimes add them up or take one or the other's team's dollar amounts. And then I usually start them if they're not already built at like a tier 3. What happens in our space sometimes, you mentioned that sometimes people get funding. So there's like a burst because they were in the news. In our case, many times someone is deciding to spend a lot of money on Facebook and Google ads. So all of a sudden they come into our sphere. And we also have a lot of competitors who put their tools on AppSumo and become incredibly cheap. And people come to us wondering why we're not as cheap as those tools. So many cases, 3 months later, 6 months later, we might not hear from those competitors, but at least we have something. So it's no longer in ad hoc. We have something available in case they decide to go back on AppSumo for a deal. But if we continue to hear them month after month, and I can continue to see them in bidding wars either on the sales side or on the customer success side, then I'll move them up to a tier 2 or a tier 3. And that means building out more resources and keeping it much more up to date.
So it's almost, yeah, it's a quantitative and qualitative data in terms of the pain they're feeling. Well, one question as well, just on Tracy's note before we get into some of that, like where you get to that solution point. Chris, what was the size of your CI team? And we actually had a question as well that would be interesting for both of you to answer is in a cross-functional organization, where does the competitive team sit? Are you mainly with the product side, the marketing side, sales side? Like where do each of your teams kind of fit?
Yeah, so the size of the current team now is 2. There are 2 of us. And to answer cross-functionally where we fit, so as I said, there's a bit of a restructuring of what the team looked like. Back then, our bigger team actually sat in pre-sales. We were, an extension of the sales team in a sense to really help enable them and get things up to speed. After the reprioritization and shifting, I now sit in product marketing, and the other person on the competitive team sits in product management. So again, very different. I've seen competitive teams sit in all 3 of those locations in completely different orgs. I don't think there's a right answer, or at least not one that I've seen. There are pros and cons about where within an org the competitive function sits, in my experience.
And yeah, my company, it started in product marketing, but then we had a slight reorg, and now it and I sit on the sales team.
Okay, interesting. And let's get into that too then, Lisa, because you mentioned early, like main pain point, sales, not only not keeping stuff up to date, but then trying to get good content for sales and then actually get them to use it. With these competitors that you've kind of identified as critical, what do you do first? Like, what's the first step you take as a person in charge of competitive to even understand what are the positioning pains that sales are like struggling with? What's causing them hiccups? How do you identify that as your main starting point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I use a few tools because I just want to do a deep discovery as to why, hopefully from the prospects or the customers' mouths. So we do have not competitive intelligence, conversational intelligence tool. And so I'll go into the calls and search for a particular competitor that we were hearing about, and hearing how the prospect is talking about it, and also hearing how the rep is talking about it. If I hear that he or she's stumbling, I'll understand what I'll need to build. And if he or she is confident, I'm like, okay, I'm going to steal that for the battle card. So I use that a bunch. I have a survey that goes out to lost deals based on being unresponsive. So folks that we don't know why they disappeared into thin air, and I get data from that as well. So that's on the sales side. And then on the customer success side, they have a weekly churn report. And so it comes out every Monday, and every Monday I go in and see who we've lost to and why. So kind of getting all of that data, and then figuring out what kind of good stuff to make out of what I've discovered there.
And as you get into the creation of the messaging, actually, Herman has a good question for this. And I'd like to get your perspective, Chris, here too, because I know, Lisa, you said you worked on the sales side, but Herman was asking who's responsible for creating this messaging for the sales team based on intelligence you find, like you've mentioned now in your churn reports or stuff you're hearing on win-loss deals. He used the example like, okay, there's a new feature roll up by competitors. So Lisa, who's responsible on your team? I think we might know the answer to this one, but how you go about it. And then Chris, it'd be actually really interesting to get kind of how that looks at your organization too.
Yeah, I work with the product marketing manager who's part of the product team. So the 2 of us work together on creating the proper positioning and messaging for that.
Yeah, and from my perspective, it's me and the other member of the competitive team. We're the ones that are really putting together what the message is in terms of, okay, for Herman's example, X competitor came out with this new feature. this is what it means. Here's the news, basically. Here's some insights on what that news means. And here's our recommendation for either how to position, how to go about looking for that in the market. If, it's a new product, here are some keywords that you might use with or hear from your prospects to help identify that this is what it is, and how to respond to any questions that come up with that. So that's more of like the ad hoc as it happens news. That being said, with the product release cycle, I work very closely with the product marketing team to integrate any and all, like, from the previous half year, any new competitive news in addition to what our new product features are, to make sure we've got the most differentiated message that we can. So it depends on the cycle, I guess. But
and quick, sorry, Pranita actually asked a question here too. We mentioned about how big your team is. How big are the organizations you're at too? Just to give a quick frame of reference as well for people in attendance.
When I started the CI program, there were about 50 people, and now we're about 120, 130 people.
Yeah, and so when I joined UiPath, it was around 1,000 employees, and we're up to about 3,500, I want to say now. Wow. So yeah, quite a bit of growth.
Okay, in terms of, so you're building the messaging. What I'm very interested about, and it's a common pain point, and I think it's the eternal question is, first of all, what's that sort of the process look like? Like, how do you go about building that messaging? And then that key thing is, how do you get sales to use it? Because I think that's sort of the big question that people want answered. And so if you had any examples or like something that you've noticed that they really latch onto, they really pick up on, I think I'd love to hear.
Chris, I always feel like I'm busting in, so go ahead.
Sure.
Go.
Yeah, so I think again, we've had a competitive team for about 3 years now, and the content has changed. The format of the content has changed over those 3 years, and much of it is in response to how the sales teams consume it. So it's there's a never-ending cycle of talking to them, evaluating with them what things they find most useful on these things, and what they might find most useful one time of year, they may find something completely different useful another time of year. So we've basically tiered out some of the way the competitive collateral is built. It includes a great tool for helping with that, where we have the main battle card page, which is more high level. And then it's almost a breadcrumb approach where they can click and either be taken to a pop-up window that has additional detail, more technical or whatever for, say the pre-sales or customer success teams, or to a completely different battle card that is focused on a single product area that we're competing with that given competitor in, rather than the more high-level holistic view.
Yeah, I think I learned my lessons from the spreadsheet days, that I needed to put things in better context and be able to be found very quickly, because especially for the sales team, they need to go in and out, and especially in the middle of a deal on a call. So one thing that they've liked in particular that they seek out that I try to put on the high level battle card are the seeds to plant doubt. In a very tactful way, just reminding them of or introducing them to some shortcoming of the competitor. We use that. Another thing that works especially well for us is competitive grids from software review sites. We might be smaller in the market, I gave the size of our company, than the two big players in the market, but we tend to do better than them on Capterra and G2. So I get a lot of enablement materials from them and put them on the battle cards, and they use them either on the screen during a call or an email follow-up. So those are in context. They know, like, oh, I know we beat those guys on review sites. Where do I go? They know where to go and to find the content. That's the fun part, but getting them to use it. It's easy now that I know how to do it. So it's repeat and then like restate it, maybe reposition it, because they, as I just alluded to, they want to get in and out. They have so many things coming at them from product, from sales, from marketing. I think they like having someone remind them that something's available. So when I say on Slack, oh, new battle cards out, great. I know I can't take it for granted that everyone on the sales team is going to go to that and read it, absorb it, and be able to use it. So when I do listen to calls on conversational intelligence tools, I'll say, oh man, I'm so glad you used this feature, or oh, I bet, if you use this battle card, you would have been able to answer it, or be sure to use the information in the battle card in your email follow-ups, etc. So, and then maybe even a third way, I send out newsletters to the team 3 times a week. And if I see that perhaps they need to pay more love to a particular battle card or board, I'll say, don't forget, we have this new resource. And so just continuing to remind them. I've never gotten any pushback like, Lisa, enough, we know it's there. They seem to appreciate it.
And kind of on that note, I wonder, like, was there always a demand from sales for this competitive information? And on that note as well, was there like skepticism on like usability or the accuracy? And if there wasn't, sweet. But if there was, like, is there any way that you start like things you did to build trust amongst the sellers that they're like, okay, I can feel confident to use this and it's gonna work?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's always demand for this type of information, but there is certainly always skepticism as well, in terms of, making sure that the materials are fresh and still accurate, even if things haven't really changed, from a competitor in a couple of years, and something you published a couple of years ago in terms of collateral is still relevant. Just assuring the teams that, hey, we've changed, they may not have. So you can look at this collateral still, it's still very much relevant, still very much up to date. Just, assuring them or reassuring them that it's relevant, I find is very helpful.
Yeah, that proof of like freshness and that it's up to date is really key as well. And on that note, actually, Dallas has a good question. You sort of touched on it a bit there, Lisa, in terms of distribution methods for the sales teams. So like, what are some of the distribution methods you use? And I guess hammering it home to increase usage. He was asking like what he uses in Clue, and do you use like what else you use on that front?
Mhm. Yeah, it depends on the type of intel I receive. I have a triage system. So if it's, I know it has short-term appeal and is super hot, like maybe dealing with stocks or an acquisition, I have a Slack channel, and the hottest news goes to the Slack channel. If it's short-term value, but not as pressing, I put it in the biweekly. We have the Clue newsletter go out every 2 weeks, so I'll wait for the newsletter. And chances are in both those scenarios, I might not put them in a board or a battle card. If the CMO sold 20,000 shares of his or her stock, it's not going to really have long-term value for the sales team. But things that I know that will be evergreen and that I know reps and other people in our company will go to on the regular, those will make it to the battle card. And this is a little Clue specific, but what's neat is when you update a battle card, when it comes time for the next newsletter to go out, it says, the following battle cards have been updated, boom, 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 boom. And the people can see, oh, wow, Lisa's keeping on it and things are up to date. Or, wow, yeah, I haven't thought about this competitor for a while. Let me go check it out.
And kind of zooming away a little bit from Clue, I think one of the things that we've touched on as well is this, like, obviously the adoption for sales, but also utilizing sales as a source of information. I think that the information from the field is obviously it's this gold mine, right? And there's probably 1,000,001 things that reps are hearing on a daily basis. And if there isn't that kind of bi-directional dialogue or communication, that's just going to sit there forever. I know, Lisa, you mentioned kind of hopping into those calls and listening in on them, but that's also, you're one person, you only have X amount of time to hop into X amount of calls. What have either of you done to kind of build a relationship and start to like advocate for and get sales to kind of share information that they're getting and hearing, and then you being able to store it and use it?
Lisa,
you can go ahead.
Okay. Well, the tough thing is, Adam, you told me to not be clue specific. The only answers I have are clue specific, which is that there are ways through a web browser and an email to share intel that the reps find. So that is often very useful. I think because I am a team of one, people feel comfortable coming to me, slacking me like, oh my gosh, I just saw this new Google ad. Like, did you know that they have this feature? So we definitely have that. And I do try to meet other teams. I talk to sales every day, so I know that I'm going to get whatever I need from them. But when it comes to marketing and product and customer success, just getting out there and saying like, for example, we just started focusing on employing folks in the DACH region of Europe, German speaking Europe. So that's a new area that I need to delve into more. So I'm in communication with the customer success rep and the marketing rep to really hone in on those, because I don't speak German, and that's not an area that I know well. I don't have like a word on the street from German prospects. So yeah, having that open dialogue that you mentioned is crucial.
So Chris, you're at a much larger organization where it might be a bit harder to be in there visibly with reps and stuff. Like I'm sure you still are to a degree, but like how does that work on your end with a much larger team?
Yeah, so again, I mean, not to just focus on Clue features, but it's definitely something that we're seeing Clue help out with. In addition to using Slack, we have a Slack channel as well that is meant for bidirectional communication. Mainly it's for questions that are being asked, but there are always good tidbits that come out in that as well. We also have a channel that uses the same type of conversational intelligence that Lisa's talking about. And it's basically the channel that we have. Just anytime a competitor is mentioned, we'll just shoot us a ping and post the message there. So that helps us focus on, the key, I guess, messages. That being said, like I said, Clue's kind of inherent two-way communication features are super helpful in this. In the past, before Clue, we would try doing different field surveys, and to be honest, the response rates weren't good. They were very small. But with Clue, not only can the field find out information about competitors, they can, anytime they find something, they can use the Clue button to, add something relevant. They can also comment on the different battle cards with things that they like and don't like. As I said previously, that would be more of a, specific time conversation with the field to say, hey, what about this battle card do you like and not like? Let's set up a meeting and discuss. Whereas now it's more real time, which I think has been super helpful.
That's sort of a live feedback loop, and that kind of parlays into this. We've kind of touched on a little bit in terms of driving adoption. What goes, and you mentioned a little bit in terms of the breadcrumbing information, but what else, in your opinion, makes good competitive content or good competitive intelligence? Because I think that's a common distinction, like what actually is worthwhile to reps, what do they really need, and what is, for lack of a better word, noise.
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on it a little bit before, but I think good competitive content has to be fresh, especially in the eyes of the field. As I said, even if it isn't necessarily new information, it still needs to appear fresh. It still needs to be relevant to them and to what they're, experiencing in the field. And then I think the other major thing is that it needs to be actionable, as Lisa was kind of touching on earlier. It needs to have the proper context. Sales shouldn't have to think about how to best use it. They should just basically know how to use it. It should already be baked into the creation of battle cards that, okay, this is the intel, this is the positioning, this is how and when you use it.
Sorry, I was muted. I had an ambulance coming by. I live by the hospital, everyone. So it's good. There's good things about that. There's also bad things, like lots of ambulance intermissions. Lisa, did you have anything else to kind of add on that front?
Yeah, no, I just to kind of piggyback on what Chris was saying, yeah, I kind of use like in my mind that if then that scenario, like if they're going to look for this, how should I frame it? So that for me is a useful piece of content. Like if they're facing objections, well, I better have an objection handling card, and having it in that format as well. Um, yeah, so yeah, definitely like another lesson learned was quality over quantity. So not having every ebook and every webinar available to the reps, they're never going to sit through that. But instead, what are the overlying things? Maybe they had 10 out of the 20 webinars dealt with our ICP. Maybe that's interesting that they're honing in on that. So either trying to get qualitative nuggets out of a whole bunch of things is useful.
We actually got an earlier question from David that I wanted to get to now, which is a little bit more broad, but I'm curious. He asked, what kind of in-house measures are you using to determine the success of your program? So I think that's always something very interesting. People want to prove your output or what you're doing is impacting the business. I'm really curious to see how both of you kind of measure the success of the competitive efforts.
Go ahead, Lisa. I was going to say,
Okay.
you go ahead.
Okay, sure. Yeah, well, one is sales readiness and sales confidence, knowing that they have the tools that they need to close a deal and close a deal faster, which leads me to my second metric, which is part of reducing time to close is due to the competitive knowledge. It's not the only factor, of course, that plays into it, but it is one. And then win rates against our particular competitors that we're targeting and have decent materials for. Those are the primary ones that we use.
Yeah, the primary one that we use as a team is really revenue impacted, and that's more directly than necessarily organizational wide. Just the number of deals that we're touching, more, I guess, personally in terms of having dedicated calls with the reps to prepare them rather than them just consuming the content. So that's a big one to help prove out, I guess, the amount of time we spend helping the field. The ones that Lisa mentioned as well, win rate is one, but that's more the sales ops team. They're the ones that are looking at that. And it's us understanding that, yes, part of the reason that we're winning is because of the CI enablement, but it's harder to measure, okay, did this person look at the battle card to help them win, or were they just lucky? That's a much tougher one, but I think it's still very important. We haven't gotten into necessarily measuring time to close like Lisa mentioned, but I think that's definitely something that we're planning on looking at and prioritizing as a KPI moving forward.
As Lisa, there's another question here, sort of on the as a team of one. I'm curious, they asked kind of about Clue, but I want to just know from your perspective, is just this person in charge of competitive, at the point you're at, what's been the biggest challenge just from being a team of one, and how are you sort of trying to overcome that, or how have you improved maybe what was your original biggest issue?
Yes, I should mention that I'm a team of one, but I'm not a CI person. I also do product marketing, sales enablement. So it's widespread. And when I started it, I was also managing two people that have nothing to deal with competitive intelligence. So it was like more of like 0.5, team of like 0.5. So in order to do that was just to make sure that people were clear, if I'm happy to work with you on a particular battle card or building out all the materials you need. But if you know that if you are also asking me to do something else, it's not related to a battle card, let me know how you want me to prioritize. And most of us at the company have personal Asana boards with tasks too. So it's easy to set a priority on them as well, along with due dates. And then I guess I'm lucky in the beginning, it was a lot of work. Maybe at times overwhelming, but then I've established practices that now make things so much easier. Like again, like, oh, okay, yeah, this person needs objection handling. Copy an objection handling card, whether you use tool or not. You just copy and paste what you've had before. It does become considerably easier as time goes on, and you find what works for your company.
For sure. You're definitely like in a more prepared space. You mentioned something as well earlier, Lisa, about, I know that primary use case, it tends to be sales, but you also talked about CS, the customer success team, being a consumer of competitive intel, and also I'm sure like a really good source. So what does that look like? Is it a little bit unique? I think it's growing the people in terms of people enabling CS with competitive. So how does that work, and how is it similar or different to enabling a seller?
Yeah, sure. I have to be honest, if I didn't have the tool I have now, with usage stats, I would have had no idea. And I've definitely been in a spreadsheet, would have had no idea who's looking at it. Unless I was on the Google Sheet and I see the letter of the person in it, I would have had zero. And plus, France is 6 hours ahead, so chances are I wouldn't have seen them anyway. So the usage stats, every time I go in, I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, the top 5 people are usually CS people. And what's funny, our company's small. We also have a lot of relatives. One of the top CS users is married to the director of sales. So I'm always like, your husband is like kicking your butt in terms of clue usage. Like, come on, like get it together. Um, so it was a welcome surprise, and as a result of that, I've reached out to them. I showed them the stats. I'm like, clearly you're spending a lot of time in this. What would you like me to do better, different? And it seems like the needs are really the same. I've lucked out in doing my work with Agorapulse. They are looking for the same things, and then at one time, CS asked me for something I haven't been asked before. It seems like within a few months, sales would have been asking me for the same thing and vice versa. So, it's been fortuitous that I haven't had to differentiate the way that I approach CI for my company.
Okay. And like in terms of like how CS use it in what cases, like
Yeah.
where are they typically using it now? And is it almost similar in terms of like noticing an objection, and it would probably come in a slightly different form than like a sales call, but is that one of the main uses?
Yeah. So again, we're a social media management tool. Instagram is hot. And so, and Instagram's API is very tight and closed. I mean, it's open to some degree, but there's not a lot you can do if you want to stay compliant. But as soon as they let the API open for a certain feature, and another tool gets to it before us, we run the risk of churn, and that's a CS example. So as soon as that happens, I kind of need to know that information. Actually, one neat thing was about a month ago was the F8 conference. That's Facebook's big conference, and Facebook owns Instagram. And we knew that they were opening up the ability to track Instagram direct messages. And we were working on it too, but we weren't allowed to say anything until the F8. So I was able to set an alert where as soon as a competitor was like, we have it, we have it, we have it, to let them know like, oh, they might go to that competitor. You don't go reach out and say, oh, I don't know if you saw the F8 news or something from our competitor, but we too are working on it, and this is our release date, and so on. So they tend to use that. Yeah, and then how is that different on the sales side? Sales side might come to us and say, oh gosh, I know I've been talking to you, sales rep. We've had great rapport. I really like the tool, but this other tool seems to have this Instagram direct message thing. And then we can use the information, say, yes, but we understand that. We saw the same press release, but we too have it as well. So
It's really interesting just kind of hearing the story there, that you didn't even realize you needed to support CS, and then you start to realize, oh, there's some usage here. And then also kind of that tying into being more proactive is like, okay, here's some stuff that I can support them so they're ready before it even becomes like a big issue. It's like, okay, this comes, we know what to do. And that's a really, really cool kind of story, how you the through line there. We have a question in from Rufus. It's changing a little bit. It's kind of gone back to the competitive landscape, and I'm just trying to read it here. So he's asking, what kind of approach or framework do you use for the analysis of your competitive landscape? So I think it's kind of what we talked about earlier there, Chris, but also in terms of price monitoring. and he wanted to know how regular, like what's the cadence on doing that and updating the necessary teams with that information.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of price, some competitors have public pricing, so we're able to, keep that extremely fresh because we have verifiable fact for what their pricing is. For others, there's certain instances where we knew one of our competitors just continued to offer massive, massive discounts when competing with us in order to try to win because our product was better. And there's a couple of ways that we approached that in terms of helping with responses, such as, hey, if they're offering you these huge discounts, then clearly they don't value their own product. So you should look at the value side. But in terms of, freshness, analyzing it, I guess it depends quite a bit. You'll hear from those in the field, and again, this is where it's important for that two-way feedback loop to come into play. You'll hear questions, hey, have we ever run into this competitor with these massive discounts or these lower prices or whatever it may be? And it's kind of keeping tabs of how often that comes up, because like I said, we were seeing that in bursts at different points in time. So it's like, oh, they've got some sort of campaign where they're trying to push this, and just when we see it like that, instantly pushing that to the field, making everyone aware of these are the messages you need to push in when we're running into this situation.
That's without, I'm really interested by that, and that's cool that you're assessing the landscape and you can kind of see, oh, this is a trend that's occurring. And you mentioned that initial kind of that positioning messaging. Is there any other, like, without going explicit into like the nitty gritty of like your product compared to someone else, but like in terms of what kind of strategies or messaging, like the kind of overarching that you would enable your sales team with or other teams with on this kind of thing, like a competitor slashing their prices like crazy. What I'm really, really curious, like how you, because at first it gives me, I'm like, oh my God, oh, that's a worry for me. But you two are the experts, so I want to know, like, I'm not sure if this is coming in your field at all, Lisa, but Chris, like, what else would you do from a strategic standpoint to be like, okay, don't worry, this is how we're going to combat it?
Yeah, I mean, your reaction is very much in line with the majority of the field when, when it's the first experience with that. Yeah. But again, just being able to walk through the full, like I said, we started with just a core automation product and expanded to a full platform that really helps deliver a ton more value than what the core platform was. So oftentimes looking at that and being able to explain the value, sure, you're paying more, but look how much more you're getting compared to that. That's one of the key things. And our sellers already know that story. Sometimes they just need to be reminded that this is really all you need to help overcome some of those price things. The other thing is, our company's got really, really good return on investment for our clients. Being able to point that out, showing them customer stories and different use cases where those things have panned out in similar scenarios, again, really helps put the mind at ease with some of those things. So that's kind of the key thing. It's just, again, I think the sellers know that, but they're so wrapped up in next sale that sometimes they just need to be reminded. And then once you do that, they're like, oh yeah, that's right.
You calm me down there with your explanation. See, I just went through it as the seller. So I have a couple more questions, and we're coming up to we've only got a little bit more time, so if anyone else has questions as well, feel free to fire them in, and I'll try and get to as many as possible with Lisa and Chris, but I also want to be respectful of your time. Overall, you've kind of both talked about different elements that's helped you develop your program and improve your program. What's changed in terms of the buy-in from leadership or visibility with leadership because of this?
Yeah, Lisa, I don't know if you want to start.
Sure. We've seen a big change because I've mentioned my good old spreadsheets. They were free, right? Part of the Google suite. So there was no investment for them, really. And then we were a team of 50, and I'm asking, can we please get an enterprise level tool? So it's just, like I knew that I needed to prove my case pretty darn quickly if I wanted to continue leveling up our competitive intelligence program. And luckily I did, which was great. And so the way it's changed now is I don't really need to prove myself. Like each year, contract comes up. It's like, okay, yeah, great. Um, and it's become part of our vernacular. Like if someone mentions something, like Chris was mentioning the two-way Slack channel, if that happens there, if we don't see the word clue, someone's like maybe a little snarkily, like, did you check clue? Or they might say to preempt that, like, hey, does someone offer this Instagram thing? I checked clue and it's not there. It's kind of, it's become a part of the landscape. And as such, people, I think the C-suite feels confident that that we have a program in place to support regularly updated, contextualized information.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the biggest thing for us is, again, I think as I mentioned, we started with Clue more as just a competitive intelligence gathering tool rather than the platform for battle cards. And we're slowly expanding into that. And I think one of the biggest things that has put leadership at ease or gotten their buy-in is seeing their sales team members ask for Clue access. We started with a pilot that was mainly focused on pre-sales, just because we thought that they would be the ones to use it more often, especially including some of, as I mentioned earlier, the different layers, peeling back the onion in different layers, adding that more technical depth, seeing what their thoughts were on that to get some of that knowledge. But seeing sales members asking for access to Clue during the pilot when we weren't even thinking about, using the sales team members. So just being able to show them that, I think has really increased the buy-in.
That's great.
And again, as I mentioned, the feedback loop, I think helps as well, showing them, hey, we tried to do these surveys before and got a paltry response. Now with Clue, we're able to get it much more quickly.
It's like a nice little before and after picture as well.
Exactly.
And you were mentioning about some of the metrics you'll track too, but I think as well, what both of you touched on there is that kind of qualitative feedback in terms of like confidence and
Yeah.
well, I mean, usage you can't quantify, but that confidence and feedback look, and just like almost like building a greater relationship with sales, because again, that's feel like it's like the real sticking point is that like product marketing or CI and sales relationship in terms of usage. One last question from me. What's next? What's next on the radar in terms of, we've talked about getting your program from point A to point B. What do you think is next for using a program, using competitive intelligence to support your team to win even more?
Yeah, so I think one of the next things we're planning on doing is a broader rollout to additional teams for Clue. That is just getting more people seats so that everyone's able to again use that two-way functionality, view all of the intelligence, get those deeper insights. Another thing we're doing is integrating it with HighSpot. We have HighSpot for content management internally, and the fact that Clue integrates with it. The sales team already uses HighSpot a ton. The fact that they don't really have to learn a new tool because we can just iframe Clue right in will be super helpful. That's one piece of feedback that we had heard. So the fact that we can do that will be tremendously helpful. And I think one of the key things that we're doing as we're making that migration more committed to Clue is using our own automation platform to migrate some of that data from the existing PowerPoint and Word documents that we have intelligence in now into Clue in a more hands-off approach, so that it doesn't take me a ton of time to manually copy and paste everything.
Love it. Yeah, here I'm not adding new competitors or new groups of our company. I feel like most groups have already gotten into it and it's on their onboarding programs, but I am taking different slices. Originally, I just had our competitors, so competitor A, B, C. And past 6 months or so, I'm taking some of the social networks that are either like super hot, like I mentioned, Instagram, or ones that we're about to launch, which is Google My Business, and then TikTok, which doesn't have an open API, but we're keeping an eye on it. So I'm taking the social networks. And what I'd love to do next is take the functional areas of us and our competitors. So like I mentioned, we support people who publish social content. So I wanted to have like a publishing board, a listening board, social listening and monitoring, and a social reporting board. And building, I know people want to see, okay, for this one feature, how do we compare with all the other competitors? So if that feature is a reporting feature, then I would have it in the reporting board. That's when I have the time, that's what I'd like to get stepping on.
Perfect. All right. That was, as we're just coming up on the hour here, that was, I think that's everything for our questions here. I really appreciate both of your time, Lisa and Chris. There was a ton. We went down many different avenues, I feel like there, but it was really good to kind of get firsthand experience of what you've done, where you came from, and where you're going next. So I really appreciate your time. I hope people in attendance got some value out of this. We tried to make it a little bit more engaging. We didn't want to just make people sit through a long presentation. And so any feedback, what we could do better, what you want to hear about, let us know. Let Chris, let Lisa know. They were awesome. And thank you everyone for your time. And yeah, we'll catch you next time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you for the opportunity.